All right, you might hear me chewing because I'm eating lunch, but I'm going to sit down and write the FRQ now. If you haven't seen the previous video where I walk through the prompt, you're going to want to go back and do that. Um, so I'm not going to talk much during this period of time just so that I can concentrate. And then I will reflect on what I've written after I'm done. So if you need to speed up, slow it down, that's perfectly fine. But I'm going to be writing this in kind of real time. And it should take me about the 35 to 40-minute time period that you would normally have to write. Okay? So I'm going to get started. Okay, so I'm done. I'll tell you right off the bat, I don't love it, but I think it's a perfectly adequate FRQ. Some days is not going to be, as good as others. Um, I definitely, um, I definitely wrote an FRQ just about an hour ago, so I'm feeling a little not myself, but it has to happen. Um, Something I struggled with is that balance of um, really using technique, like analyzing the technique, and also explaining what is happening without getting too plot heavy. I think there are a couple of parts where I rely a bit too much on plot summary instead of analysis. But we'll go through and I can kind of highlight those parts. And see, I'm only at 30 minutes. So I would still have like 10 minutes to go back and fix this or add. Um, where I would add would probably be a little bit more discussion of the technique so that I'm dealing with the whole thing. Okay, I said, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. It is a natural experience for every person to, at some point in their lives, navigate the complex waters of a life of their own making. While the cocoon of family and routine are desirable, it is in those moments of painful decisions, broken promises, and change that true insight and understanding can be born. This natural experience of the awkward transition from family to self is discussed in William Dean Howells' novel, The Rise of Silas Lapham, in which Howells' narrator discusses the Lapham daughters, Penelope and Irene, and the complex relationship they both have with their family and society. While Irene seems relatively content with her isolation from the outside world, the younger Penelope begins to desire for the first time the delightful trappings of young love and the sense of separation that comes from learning who you are. So I'm pretty happy with this introduction. I have a very clear thesis. I'm pretty sure I would get the point for thesis because it's clear. It may not be the thesis that they're looking for, but it is a clear thesis. And I have a relatively good hook that I connect to my thesis statement. So I'm pretty okay with the opening. Howell's narrator begins the excerpt with a discussion of the Lapham ladies, mother and daughters, and the blissful ignorance they have of their state in society. They are far more concerned with buying dresses far beyond their capacity to wear and taking long naps every day, sitting hours together, minutely discussing what they saw out of the window. Their experiences together, are simple and aloof, and while the society outside the cocoon in which they built causes them to scare away young men who were probably not the wisest, Howell's desire, and this is an important thing, his name ends with an S, desire to display the environment of the unique Laphams is emphasized by the details he chooses to select. The fashionable dress that seems out of their depth, the pull of self-improvement to the point that it may intimidate and scare others, all of these things that the Lapham girls do to participate in society only further draw upon their inability to participate in it. While I think this is pretty well written, I would have liked to have spent a little bit more time on the selection of detail. I think I kind of was going through, wanted to move on to the next point, and I didn't reflect on it enough, and that's a common mistake. While Howells emphasizes their isolation, he also seems to suggest that it is the result of their ignorance and reliance on their family for all comfort. While the Laphams seek out societal experiences and had learned to dance at the prestigious Papantis, they fail to be included in the elite private classes, causing a great gulf between them and those that did. This metaphorical and literal gulf created by their ignorance of society is Howell's way of explaining the ineptitude of the Lapham family to fully provide for the girls in society. Because while they were able to give the girls an experience of witnessing, this supposed to be witnessing multitudes of girls, lovely, accomplished, exquisitely dressed, humbly glad of the presence of any sort of young man. It was the adults in their lives, namely Mrs. Lapham, that could not give her girls the skill or courage to set them apart in society. Howell's use of metaphor here helps juxtapose the real division the girls have and experience and presents a scenario of the debilitating nature of clinging to the comfort rather than setting out on your own. This clinging then keeps the girls from the things they aren't always sure they want, and they instead lurk helplessly about in hotel parlors, looking on and not knowing how to put themselves forward. Again, I think it's pretty well written. My integration of quotes is good, but I wish that I would have talked actually about narrator here a little bit, especially since if you look at the prompt, it mentions narration. It mentions a tone, and I could have talked about the tone of the passage. And that was one place where I fell flat. So here I focused more on juxtaposition and contrast and that metaphor. And then lastly, in the final stage of the excerpt, Howell details for the first time how the daughters themselves start to break apart from each other in search for things fitting of their personality. While the eldest has no desire for society, it is Penelope that has beauty and desire, which pulls her away from the familiar comforts of home. Howells here sets up the metaphor of Penelope's beauty being like a flower starting to bloom, but is often prevented by the vegetable of her innocence. By describing the girl as having innocence almost vegetable, it highlights Penelope's inability to function on her own and make her beauty exist in its immaturity unconscious of a flower. It is only when she meets a young man at Bay St. Joan that she is able, for the first time, to see the purpose of her instinctive dress and her painful dependence on her mother and sister for her opinions, because her desire to learn about someone and something outside her family causes her, for the first time, to think outside the beliefs of her family. While there is a sense here that she is transferring lack of independence of thought onto the possibly unaware young man, she does gain some uncomfortable empowerment in thinking of things she had not thought of before, and all the pain and misunderstanding that can come with it. I think I do talk about this metaphor again. I could have done more. That's the thing. Like, I do some, but I could have done more. I could have talked about another strategy, maybe even more on selection of detail, but I kind of let that fall flat to discuss. I'm analyzing the plot, but I'm spending not enough time, I think, analyzing the actual techniques of the writer. So that's something that I would want to go back and fix. This is my conclusion now. If the pain and misunderstanding of youth are to be understood, it must require the individual to take stock of how the world perceives them, and then in turn, how they perceive the world. William Dean Howells aptly presents this awkwardness to the reader in the only way he can, through complexity of language, the transformation of childhood, and in the careful but detached observation of a narrator who seems to see the young girls groping in the dark, searching for a way to keep their innocence while trying to fit into a society they aren't sure they want. In this experience, the fact that one is often misunderstood or mistaken becomes one of the greatest factors of living in a world where you must rely on yourself for comfort. Okay, so the conclusion is fine. It's a little wordy. It's a little off topic at times, but this is not an area in which I would worry about losing points, because my language is sophisticated enough, my sentence structure throughout is sophisticated enough that I would earn the sophistication point. So let's go back through the prose analysis. Notice this is a little bit like the open prompt, except kind of think of the open prompt mixed with a rhetorical analysis, because you were discussing the techniques that a writer is using to get at a certain point. So I wanted to highlight that my transitions from paragraph to paragraph, sometimes they're there and obvious and sometimes they're not. That'd be something that I'd go back and fix. In terms of how I set up my body paragraphs, I always start with something the writer is doing. So how he begins, then he moves on to this, finally he does this. And then I go into kind of describing the experience and using evidence, integrating evidence as part of my analysis. Okay. So if I was to go back and fix this, what I would do is in each body paragraph, I would just extend my analysis of technique a little bit more so that I knew that I was thoroughly analyzing. So in terms of the rubric, I would get a point for thesis because my thesis is present and clear. And then I would get, out of evidence and commentary, I'd give myself a 3 for evidence and commentary, because I do have a lot of evidence and I do have quite a bit of commentary, but the commentary could be expanded. And then my sophistication point I would give myself, because one, of how I integrate quotes. You notice I don't have blocks of quotes. I integrate it within my analysis as I go through, which I just find the easiest to do. And it's a much more complex and advanced way to integrate evidence. And then the writing style overall is very strong. This, for a rough draft, I think would be worthy of college credit. So I would give myself that, end up giving myself a 5 out of 6. And that would be, I think, a realistic score for me, given the fact that I am a little biased because I wrote it. But you have to be able to look back and take stock of your writing and decide where you need to grow. So the best way that you can prepare for this is to write some FRQs. Do some practice, send it to me, let me critique it, give you a score so you know what to work on, and make sure that you have a good foundation of the actual terminology. The good thing about the prose is that we know most of the terms. You know the techniques of prose. You know about fiction, and you also know about writing style. And so, but it's still worth going back and looking through. Okay. If you have any questions, concerns, critiques, please let me know. And hopefully this is helpful to you. And if you can't come to our live conversations, maybe you can still get some help just by reading what I prepped for you today. Okay. Thanks. Bye.